Hey there, this is Benjamin Morse, comic book artist, and wanted to throw together a quick video to kind of show off some things I found while I've been doing some research for my Scarlet Twilight sequel called Cobalt Crisis. I need to create a lot of Golden Age looking superheroes for this book. It's going to be kind of a Crisis on Infinite Earths scale event book, but done in the old Golden Age style. And so I have a huge supporting cast to come up with, a lot of costumes, and I've been doing some research into costumes that era to find some stuff that's not just the sort of, I remember the Justice Societies, Captain America, to kind of do a bit of a deeper dive in research and find some things that have not carried through to modern comics as much that might be cool to revisit. So as you can see here, we've got an issue of Hit Comics from back in the day. This guy's got some pretty cool, the Red Bee, not the greatest name I've ever heard, but he's got a lot of things going on that are very typical of the era that have not necessarily survived the test of time and thus are kind of cool for me to go back and look at and throw some characters in that have that so I can get that like sort of era's appeal in ways that we haven't seen in a while. One thing you see a lot of is these stripes. I guess they were very big at the time and performers and things like that. And while you see a lot of that in superheroes of the time, if you really look into it, the ones that we still remember that the costumes have survived more or less unchanged in the modern era, like Alan Scott, like Dr. Fate, we were familiar with those conventions, but not necessarily as familiar with some of the weird things you see here. Stripes are one of them. These weird baggy sleeves that are see-through, you do see kind of a lot. In addition, the ray gun and stuff like that we're pretty familiar with. So that was kind of a cool thing I'm definitely going to use to put into that. Can show off a little bit. These are some characters I've been throwing together. Some I'm going to use, some I won't. But this is kind of what this research is going into, is just developing this huge cast of characters. And my goal here is to not just do stuff that looks like the Justice Society, although I do want to have a lot of that. I want to kind of bring in some influences that inspired these old comics and see if I can get to a place that feels the same, but is a little bit more, gives a little bit more of a variety than not just things we've seen a lot of. So moving on here, this is kind of one when I was saying the things that we remember from the era, this is a good example, largely because this costume was perfect and they used it more or less unchanged until the New 52, which I think they changed it maybe just to change it. But this is definitely kind of your boilerplate, I think, Golden Age costume done really well. We'll see a few that are not done well as also. This guy here, Rex Dexter of Mars, sort of a Buck Rogers guy. This is a cool drawing. One thing I think is interesting about him is these boots are really strange. I'm not sure what they mean. Maybe they indicate which side is up if he needs help with that. I don't know how it works on Mars, but it's always seemed to be pretty self-explanatory here. Another thing I think is cool about this guy is his helmet. You'd see a lot of these helmets. In fact, you're going to see a more normal one on a different character. That's more typical of what you see when you have a Buck Rogers helmeted character like this. But they kind of went in and did some interesting things to make him stand out a bit that I think is cool. Although this ends up looking like some weird gardening appliance maybe. But I do appreciate that this was a little bit unique. Here's more of a standard sort of science fiction hero helmet. They generally just go with that fin, the flared thing in the back. Sometimes there's the points up here, sometimes not. And as cool as this costume is, I like Sky Wizard. I do appreciate, and it's the kind of thing I was hoping to see when I researched these old comics, things like what you get in the Rex Dexter helmet. Just a little bit of an interesting take. This is another one. I think this is interesting for a few reasons, art style being a big one. A really cool thing about these old comics is they didn't have decades of comic tropes to sort of influence how they rendered certain things. So you'd see a lot of textures. You'd see a lot of lighting that did not really go back in the comics once it became a more established look. So it's really interesting to see that stuff. I kind of put the Blue Beetle in here as notable, I think, just for this very standard shape of his mask, which you see a lot of, and it's definitely going to be a thing I use quite a bit. They had an interesting way of drawing his sort of eye mask as well. But I kind of included this just to be, this is almost like a standard sort of out-of-the-box 1930s, 40s superhero. I also kind of like this one because I don't know why he's beating up this guy, but I assume it's because of this suit. I think he had it coming. Moving on, this is something we see a lot of back in the day when I'd researched, but not a lot of now. These sort of pirate buccaneer-inspired guys came up a lot. Definitely going to throw a few of those types of dudes in there. I included this particular one as an example because this is a really nice drawing. You've got in spots. This figure is really wonky, but these faces and these guys look really cool. I thought at first this might be some really early Frazetta because he does some things like this, the proportions when he was really young and learning his way, where you'd see things like that. But I believe it's by somebody named Lou Fine, who I've heard of a few times before. Anyway, cool cover. Good example. I kind of wanted to cover, there were a lot of pirate guys that were more or less just pirates doing superhero type stuff. This is one I really like, partially because of these stripes, which I think are just so unabashedly 1940s. I love his look, the sort of otherworldly face there. Skulls always look good on superheroes. I'm not sure if this stripe was supposed to have a yellow relief line in there, or if that's an offset printing thing. I assume the latter, but I really like the yellow in there. If they weren't doing it on purpose, I hope they started after they saw that. Here's another cool one. It's an interesting cover concept, this weird science fiction Death Star Gulliver Travels thing he has going on here. This is also kind of an out-of-the-box example of a science hero. Not really interesting. Cool logo. Predates Captain Atom, I assume, but interesting stuff just to see if you're kind of just starting from scratch, which I do in a lot of characters. This would be a good starting point. This one I liked a lot because a few reasons. I liked that you'd see sometimes you'd have these sort of cowboy things on, I can call it a bandana, kerchief things on a lot of characters. It's a pretty cool design too, in that they didn't just plop a star on them, they expanded it so it covers up the whole shirt and gives you a more interesting kind of silhouette. Also, there were a lot of guys that kind of had these pointed ears like you'd see in Batman or Owlman. I definitely trying to find a way to use those in a character that doesn't look like those characters exactly, but we'll see if that works out or not. I also really love this drawing. You get this great, street here. Pretty cool, actually pretty solid drawing in comparison to a lot of these. I also like that they paraded, I assume the villain has been captured. I guess they took him out of jail for the day and paraded him around town all tied up. Doesn't look happy about it, which I don't blame him for. That doesn't seem quite fair. I guess it would depend on what he did. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. This one I included because it's an example of something they would do with space backgrounds I really like, so it was just fun to see. A thing that's cool about this is I really like when they would do the science heroes, but they did not necessarily rip off Buck Rogers. So you see some of those elements, of course. This has a Flash Gordon-y Buck Rogers feel, as does everything in the background. But they made this more of a spacesuit, almost looks like a submariner's outfit with some gear. So this was a cool variation, I think, on that theme that I wanted to show. This one's also really cool. I think I downloaded it mostly because it has this beautiful upper third with the type. Everything there is beautiful. Love it. This is another guy that is just an example of what they would do. A lot of times it would just be maybe a cape and no shirt, or they'd have those short shorts, which you really never see anymore nowadays, but was pretty heavily used back then as these people were figuring out, how to do a cool looking superhero. So interesting in that regard, I think. Bullet Man is another example of a very 30s one, but I feel like his costume avoided some of the things that we look at and maybe find silly. I mean, I think they're cool. So he's I think stayed around a little bit more because he looks very 40s, but also doesn't fall into, there's all these weird stripes or there's this or that. So cool stuff there. Gotta love this logo. I don't know if they all needed to be made out of bullets, but interesting to see. This one I kind of, again, grabbed because it was a really cool piece of art. This weird animated feel it has is really cool to see. I don't think I've seen that in any other piece of artwork I've come across. But this is an example of, inversely, from what I was saying with Bullet Man, this has got a lot of the silliness of the era in it, which is why we don't probably see a lot of costumes like it. The stripes, the shorts, all that. But definitely something I'm going to use as I start designing all these characters I showed you. Again, there's things I'm pulling in from Strongman, there's women's fashion, other stuff, just to give it a little bit of a difference. But those stripes are the biggest element I feel like I've seen a ton of back in the day that just did not carry through. So it's Certainly something I'm going to lean on quite a bit. I wanted to mention your sort of Uncle Sam characters. There were a lot of these old superheroes that were just Uncle Sam, which I think they still use him. In addition to that, there'd be guys that were just cowboys or just bomber pilots. No superhero frills on there at all. They would behave like superheroes. I picked this one because a really interesting piece of artwork. It almost looks like Bernie Wrightson drew this in a lot of ways. I did not notice that person being held. That's weird. But anyway, really cool artwork here. Love the trade dress and all that stuff. But interesting in just that it's a lot of these old characters would just be some guy and he'd have a funny name and he'd be like a lumberjack in Fight Crime, something like that. This is another one I think I picked just because it looked cool. I like this costume, even though, this logo is probably a pain to draw over and over again. But I really like what he's got going on with his colors and also this sleeve, like this sort of diamond back pattern. Cool stuff there. Not sure what this villain is up to. He looks like a evil beatnik lobbyist, which I suppose I'm against. Now, this one is cool for a lot of reasons. It's a beautiful drawing, for one. Great colors, really cool layout. This is something that I really was inspired by because it took kind of some superhero things that she has going on. It's a tight costume and all that. But it also looks a lot like maybe a performer's, dancer's outfit from that era. And so I think this is cool because it stays away from a lot of the tropes that we have seen over and over again by pulling in things from the era that are not necessarily things that we see a lot of. And that's something in my research I tried to look at a lot of because it was really fun to maybe bring in old football players, maybe old dancer outfits, even women's fashion. Those looked really cool, worked really well, and they're a great thing to bring into the superhero stuff. So you can, just with the amount of cast I'm going to have to come up with, I need to be cognizant of ways to make them not look too repetitive. And doing things like this is, I think, going to be a big help. And this is another example of your sort of superhero guy that was just, a bomber pilot. Beautiful cover. I love the scope of this. I love this logo he's got. And I also really like this little bug sort of advertisement inset thing. That's definitely a cool period detail. And then I wanted to go through a few of these characters I think just look really great. Captain Midnight is, I think, almost the perfect Golden Age costume. Great logo. I love these goggles. He's kind of a pilot type guy in addition to everything else. I think that was a great mix of, we're going to do a pilot, we're also going to make him a superhero, and it really works. This is a nicer drawing. I think they ripped off the older one. My initial thought was maybe this was a variation of his costume where it was in black, but I think it's just more of a shadow they threw in. But anyway, looks good, and it kind of shows you what a versatile costume this one was. This is a great look at it. Again, great colors, just top-notch stuff. Great character design. This collar is also something I see a ton of back in these old comics, but you don't see a lot of anymore. And this was a really good use of it. It just gives it that kind of half superhero, half pilot jacket sort of look. Cool stuff there. Here he is, the nice endorsement from Captain Marvel. Cool stuff. Greatest ace of them all. And I like that this drawing, in addition to just being cool, really leans on the pilot aspects of his uniform. Just a great combination. And here's a serial he was in. I've never seen this one, but I'm going to have to check it out. So you can obviously see this was a pretty successful character back in the day. Spy Smasher is another one that I think is just almost a perfect Golden Age costume. Normally it's green. I think this might have just been a weird printing, something like that. But great stuff there. This is a cool drawing. Love those goggles. This is a more standard look at his outfit, which I like to see. I definitely like the green in there with the red more than the brown, but and then you can have the brown in spots here. Cool stuff. Really like it. Here's another really great cover of him. I think they still use him today every now and then. And again, another one that was successful enough to be adapted into a movie. It's a cool piece of artwork, even though it looks like it was done by several different people. I have seen this one. Highly recommend it. Really cool character, and it's one of the better serials of the ones that you saw from the era. So that's pretty much it. Definitely drawing a lot of inspiration from these costumes as I'm putting together this Scarlet Twilight sequel, which is going to be called Cobalt Crisis. going to have a need to produce a lot of these characters, and I want to make sure they really bring you into the era. So it was fun to take a deep dive and look at some of these outfits, things that come up a lot that I can use. And also, it's just a good excuse to look at some of this beautiful high-res scans from Heritage Auction of these characters. Can't say enough awesome things about this old artwork. It was really cool. It's just really cool to see how people approach these characters before there was decades of, sort of information on how to interpret these characters that get you the more standard comic book look that I also love. But you see some really interesting things if you kind of go back in the Wild West that Golden Age Comics was. So I hope you've enjoyed this look at some of these characters. Just want to throw in a quick reminder. My campaign for We Are Scarlet Twilight #4 and the hardcover collection is live now on Zoop. So if you into all this old Golden Age stuff like I am, I think you're really going to like my comic. I've got great ways to catch up on it if it's new to you, and obviously a collection is there if you've been following along and would like that. So if you're into this stuff, please give it a look. I think you'll dig it.